Hello and welcome. I'm Sarah Churchill, the Adjunct Instructor of Art History at Housatonic Community College, and I'll be your guide as we tour the Roots of Abstract Expressionism, an exhibition by the Housatonic Museum of Art in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Forging a new path between the pure abstraction and surrealism of the European avant-garde, the abstract expressionists reinvented modernism after the Second World War, shifting the fine arts capital from Paris to the gritty Greenwich Village art scene in New York City. Join me as we consider some examples from the New York School and beyond, including Jimmy Ernst, Willem de Kooning, William Baziotes, Hale Woodruff, Romery Bearden, Louise Nevelson, and others. In the now iconic Life magazine photograph known as the Irascibles, a group of 15 mostly male artists declared ideological warfare upon conservative institutions like Time magazine and the Metropolitan Museum of Art, denouncing their open hostility to the new American modernism. While the group lacked a unified or cohesive style, these men and women, nonetheless, shared a longing for individual expression, or what would come to be called the autographic gesture. The abstract expressionists were reaching for something new, a visual language that would, as art critic Harold Rosenberg said, formulate as exactly as possible what is emotionally real to them as separate persons. How is it then that such a diverse group, united largely by the desire to stand alone, came to be understood beneath the unifying banner of abstract expressionism? Jimmy Ernst was the son of famed surrealist Max Ernst and the art historian Louise Strauss. Ernst grew up between Cologne and Paris among celebrated surrealists Salvador Dali, Man Ray, Joan Miró, and Yves Tanguy. Fleeing the rise of the Nazi Party, he arrived in New York in 1938, where his artistic pedigree provided him entrance to the emerging New York avant-garde. He first worked at MoMA and later became director of Peggy Guggenheim's gallery Art of this Century, painting in the evenings and befriending abstract expressionists like William Baziotes. Ernst had his first solo show in 1943 and shortly thereafter became one of the Irascible 18, a group that protested the Metropolitan Museum of Art's regressive attitude towards contemporary American painting in the 1940s. Part of a series exploring the juxtaposition of a circle within a square, Disc is considered one of Ernst's mature works, a significant departure from his earlier surrealist biomorphic automatism. Ernst juxtaposes chaos against containment. At the center, a circle constituted by a dense web of jagged, intersecting lines is framed by a square field of warm, muddy brown, the bounds of which impose a kind of order upon the anarchy. Like an explosion, dark shards of gray and black converge against a variegated field of cerulean, olive, and rust, creating the impression of space and architecture. It's as if one of TATLIN'S imagined monuments have burst apart, sending fragments of steel and glass hurtling outward in all directions. Throughout the disc series, pigment is scraped away, generating a sense of motion in the tectonic forms emerging from inky blackness. In other examples from this series, such as the smaller mixed media Disc 13, blades and shards fan out in all directions like turbines against a dark and disordered dreamscape. Willem de Kooning's small bronze seated woman, cast from a series of 13 small terracotta sculptures begun in 1969, is dense yet powerful, capturing the frenetic and furious scramble of de Kooning's two-dimensional paintings and drawings. This particular bronze, an artist's proof, was gifted to the Connecticut-born sculptor and club founder Philip Pavia. Several of these, including standing figures and reclining figures, were enlarged and cast in bronze in the early 80s. Not a natural sculptor, de Kooning's late career exploration in the medium resulted from a chance encounter with sculptor and friend Herzl Emanuel while traveling in Rome. The subject matter of Seated Woman, a rumpled and monstrously distorted female figure, was of course well familiar to de Kooning and occupied his attentions for nearly 30 years. Considered among the more aggressive revisions of the female figure in art history, de Kooning's Canonical Woman series from 1950 to 53 also reinvented the gesture in American painting. Critic Harold Rosenberg defined de Kooning's gestural mark-making as action painting, a means of artistic production which emphasized an ongoing and often spontaneous interaction between the artist and his canvas. According to conservator and art historian Susan Lake, de Kooning was also keenly interested in surface texture, becoming progressively more textured throughout the 1950s and 60s. Best known for his figurative murals and gritty social realism, Hale Woodruff is somewhat less familiar as an abstract expressionist. Born and raised in Illinois, Woodruff attended the John Herron Art Institute and the Art Institute of Chicago before embarking on a 4-year sojourn in Paris in 1927. Much like his younger contemporary, Romary Bearden, Woodruff's experience in Europe was transformative, connecting him to a group of radical, expatriated African-American artists and intellectuals that included painter Henry Ossawa Tanner, performer and activist Josephine Baker, and the writer, philosopher, and godfather of the Harlem Renaissance, Alan Locke. A reluctant teacher, Woodruff became one of the most influential educators of the 20th century, mentoring many artists, including Jacob Lawrence, Leo Twiggs, and Faith Ringgold. He established the first fine art department for Southern black students at Atlanta University in 1931, and was one of the first African-American professors hired at New York University, where he worked until 1968. Along with Bearden and Richard Mayhew, Woodruff also co-founded Spiral in 1963, a collective of African-American artists dedicated to examining the role of visual art in the civil rights movement. Woodruff's talents and interests were diverse, extending across figural representation, abstraction, Mexican muralism, regionalism, and Pan-Africanism. He often worked in and across multiple visual languages throughout his life. Following an apprenticeship with Diego Rivera, he produced his best-known works, a series of murals at Talladega College, Golden State Mutual Life Insurance Company, and Clark Atlanta University Art Gallery, before moving towards abstraction in the 1950s and 60s. Two Figures Abstraction belongs to a later period of his work in which expressionistic color, vigorous brushwork, and gestural spontaneity intersected with pictographic forms inspired by African sculpture, painting, and textile design. Woodruff mined sources in African art, rooting his influences in his cultural and racial difference. Instead of avoiding specific biographical references, as was typically advocated for in the New York School, Woodruff worked against racial segregation throughout his career, even among the supposedly enlightened art world avant-garde. Though many of those associated with Spiral were abstract expressionists, their work was ignored by critics like Clement Greenberg as too autobiographical. Romary Bearden's The Conversation exemplifies Bearden's mining of memory, mythology, and emotional realism as rich sources of his personal visual vocabulary, centering and celebrating Black cultural life within the context of universal themes, such as religion or migration. Bearden's paintings, prints, and collages, much like James Van Der Zee's photographic portraiture, reclaimed the dignity of the new Black citizen from the poisonous battlefield of American visual politics. His childhood in rural North Carolina, coming of age in Harlem and Pittsburgh in the 1920s, and emergence as a major artist at the height of abstract expressionism intersected squarely with battles over the iconographic representation of African Americans. Bearden's lithograph, The Conversation, exemplifies an autobiographical approach common to his mature works, exploring a personal symbolism constructed by passing trains, roosters, and neighborhoods populated by conjure women and references to African material culture. A critical figure in the Harlem Renaissance, Romary Bearden is best known for his series of collages and photostats known as projections. Completed in 1964, the series marks Bearden's departure from abstract expressionism, an uncompromising return to lyrical figuration and narrative. Merging his political activism with interests in Western art, African sculpture, Mexican mural painting, and music, especially blues and jazz, Bearden's prints, collages, and paintings throughout the 1960s and 70s embodied the urgency of the civil rights movement and the negotiation of race and identity politics in America. According to his biographer, Mary Schmidt Campbell, Bearden insisted that his work was neither propaganda nor sociology. Rather, he described his approach as an exploration of the prevalence of ritual, an attention to the choreography of daily life in Black America. The Conversation follows Bearden's 1977 cycle of collages and watercolors based on Homer's epic poem, The Odyssey, in which Bearden gave Homer's Odyssey modern cultural relevance, seeing in the epic battle for Troy a parallel to the rioting and protests of the American Civil Rights Movement. Mining both African and Western art historical tradition, Bearden combined colorful Byzantine flatness, ancient Near Eastern abstraction, and West African tradition and ritual with the figurative modernism of Matisse and Picasso. The conversation, like Bearden's Odyssey series, plays with sharp-edged abstraction and bold fields of flat color. The two female figures at right reflect Bearden's fascination with African material culture. The dress of the woman on the left may reference Kuba cloth or West African kente textiles. The woman's exaggerated silhouettes, a composite of frontal and profile views, recall Kalabari water spirit masks in Yoruban sculptural traditions. The youngest of the first-generation abstract expressionists, Teodoros Stamos, was a largely self-taught painter whose early interests in automatism and biomorphic imagery positioned him, along with Adolf Gottlieb and William Basiodes, among the more poetic, symbolic side of abstract expressionism. Like Rothko, whom he befriended in 1947, Stamos was interested in primitive mythological imagery and the pursuit of a transcendental truth, which he reconciled through experiments in color designed to envelop and overwhelm the viewer's perception. His mature paintings index his responses to place. IFLS, for example, was inspired by the Greek island of Lefkada, where Stamos spent much of his time from 1970 until his death. The autographic nature of lithography, a process which captures the exact mark of the hand upon the stone or plate surface, makes this medium ideal for abstract expressionism. Stamos was regarded as a natural phenomenon by his friends and contemporaries. In an essay published in the catalog of Stamos' second solo exhibition at the Betty Parsons Gallery, Barnett Newman warmly praised Stamos' work as subtle and sensuous, able to catch not only the glow of an object in all its splendor, but its inner life with all its dramatic implications of terror and mystery. Attempts to assess Nevelson's sculpture in terms of its gendered themes or aesthetics have been met with derision by feminists and by Nevelson herself. While fundamental to the history of feminist art, Nevelson, like fellow abstract expressionists Lee Krasner, Elaine de Kooning, Grace Hardigan, and Helen Frankenthaler, preferred to be seen as artists first, not as women. Yet the art world too frequently struggled to see female abstract expressionists beyond their gender. A review of Nevelson's first solo show in 1941 revealed the sexism inherent to the industry. We learned that the artist is a woman in time to check our enthusiasm. Had it been otherwise, we might have hailed these sculptural expressions as by surely a great figure among moderns. The abstract expressionists battled the establishment and captured the attentions of the entire mid-century art world. Theirs was the fertile ground upon which 20th century American art took root. Thank you for joining me today at the Housatonic Museum of Art. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation, and I invite you to visit our permanent collections on view throughout the campus, as well as our special exhibitions in the Berg-Chernow galleries. For more information, please visit www.housatonicmuseum.org.